All right, let's kick off another deep dive. Today we're tackling,
Tariffs.
well, yeah, tariffs, but more specifically, this research document you sent over
Okay.
called Tariffs and How to Actually Achieve a Better Cost of Living. It's a pretty
Yeah.
complex topic, and I gotta say, you've done some
Still
really
inside.
impressive work.
It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
I can tell, yeah, gigging into all these potential solutions for a stronger economy, lower living costs, all that.
Yeah, it's a question on a lot of people's minds, right? Like, can tariffs really help us achieve a better standard of living?
Absolutely. And you take this really fascinating approach by, looking back at
Yeah.
history,
Talk about history.
especially the Great Depression, right? To
Yeah.
kind of see like where tariffs could go wrong.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Are they really the answer? Or are there better ways to, boost the economy and make things more affordable?
Totally. And you start by looking at the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which, a lot of our listeners probably remember this one, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was supposed to protect American industries during the Depression, right?
Like American jobs, that was the idea.
But then, of course, it kind of backfired spectacular.
Yeah, classic case of unintended consequences, right?
Big time. So walk us through that a little bit.
Well, the thinking was, if we slap tariffs on imported goods, it'll force people to buy American, right?
Mm.
Boost domestic production, protect American jobs, all that.
Sounds good in theory.
Right, but then other countries got mad, they retaliated with their own tariffs on American goods, and suddenly global trade just shrunk, and it actually made the whole economic downturn even worse.
Like shooting ourselves in the foot almost.
Pretty much. It's a
Yeah.
cautionary tale for sure.
For sure. And then you go on to really dissect those factors that led to the Great Depression, right?
Right.
You highlight, what is it, 6 key areas.
Yeah, 6 big ones.
And you point out that, like, everyone knows about the stock market crash, right? 1929.
Of course, it's like the iconic image of the Great Depression.
Exactly. But you're saying there's all this other stuff going on
There's so much more to the story.
under the surface.
Yeah, you had banks failing left and right. People stopped spending money because they were terrified. And then you had the Dust Bowl, which was just a total environmental disaster.
Oh, right. Forgot about that one.
Yeah, and then on top of all that, you had rising income inequality. The rich were getting richer, the poor were getting poorer, and then the Federal Reserve, they were trying to fix things, but their policies might have actually made things worse.
Okay, so break that down for us a little bit. Like, all those factors, how did they all work together to create, like, this perfect storm of economic disaster?
Okay, so take the Dust Bowl, for example.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a random natural disaster. It actually made existing economic disparities way worse.
Okay, how so?
So, think about it. The Dust Bowl destroyed farmlands, forced families to flee. It was basically an economic gut punch, especially for those who were already struggling. But the wealthy, they were often better off, more insulated from those environmental and economic shocks.
So it widened the gap even more.
Exactly, just threw fuel on the fire.
And what about the Federal Reserve? What were they doing that might have actually backfired?
Well, they were trying to control the situation, right? Stabilize the financial system.
Right.
So they restricted access to funds, like raising interest rates, making it harder to borrow money. The idea was to slow down the economy to control inflation.
Okay, makes sense.
But it may have backfired because businesses and individuals actually needed access to credit to survive, to keep things running. So by restricting credit, they might have actually made the recession worse.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, it's like they were trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
So it sounds like you're saying that, like, the traditional narrative about the Great Depression, it's kind of oversimplified, right?
Yeah, it's way more complex than just the stock market crash. There were all these interconnected factors that contributed to the disaster.
And that's what makes your research so fascinating, because you don't just stop at the history lesson, right? You go on to draw these, like, really specific parallels to what's happening in our economy today.
Well, yeah, we're seeing some pretty eerie echoes of the past. And it's not just me saying, oh, things are bad now, just like the 1930s. It's about looking at the specifics.
Give us some examples.
Well, for starters, think about the speculative bubbles that led to the '29 crash. We're seeing similar things today, right?
Okay, I see where you're going with this, like the tech bubble or the whole cryptocurrency craze.
Exactly. These massive rises and falls in asset values, it's often driven by speculation, not by, real economic fundamentals. And that creates this sense of instability, this feeling that things could come crashing down at any moment.
And you're saying that makes our economy more vulnerable, just like back then.
Absolutely. It's a house of cards waiting to fall.
Okay, so that's one parallel. What else?
Well, you also drew a really interesting parallel between the Dust Bowl and climate change.
Oh, right. That was a good one.
Like the Dust Bowl was this massive environmental disruption,
Yeah.
right? It devastated agriculture, forced families to migrate, created all sorts of economic hardship. And now we're seeing climate change doing similar things.
Yeah, droughts, floods, wildfires, all that stuff. It's disrupting supply chains, damaging infrastructure, making food more expensive, just creating this general sense of economic unease.
Exactly. And just like the Dust Bowl disproportionately hit those who are already struggling, the poorest and most vulnerable.
Climate change is going to do the same thing,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's already happening. Lower income communities, developing countries, they're the ones who are going to bear the brunt of the environmental and economic fallout.
It's a scary thought, for sure.
It is. And it brings us to the big question,
A
right?
billion-dollar question.
Exactly. If we're seeing all these historical parallels playing out, is slapping tariffs on everything really the best solution?
Especially since it backfired so badly during the Depression.
Exactly. Or are there smarter, more sustainable ways to create a more resilient economy? One that works for everyone.
And that's what you set out to explore, right?
That's the heart of it.
All right, so in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to get into those specific risks and drawbacks of tariffs in today's world, right?
That's right. We'll unpack all that.
And then finally, we'll get to the good stuff, your proposed solutions, which I gotta say are really exciting and offer a much more hopeful vision for the future. But before we jump into all that, I want to pause here for a second and just see if anything really stood out to you in this initial historical analysis.
Well, I think the main takeaway for me is, that history can teach us a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we can't just assume that what worked in the past or what we think worked in the past will automatically work today,
Yeah, the world's a lot more complicated now.
Exactly, and you really capture that complexity in your analysis of those historical parallels.
Thanks. So moving on to the present,
Say.
your document dives into some of those potential pitfalls of tariffs, especially in today's super interconnected global economy.
Right, the world's a lot smaller now than it was back in the 1930s.
Totally. So what's the biggest risk you see with tariffs?
I think one of the most significant ones is the impact they can have on supply chain flexibility.
Okay, that's something we're all a lot more aware of now, right?
Oh, yeah.
After all those disruptions we saw during,
The pandemic.
the pandemic, exactly.
Supply chains were thrown into chaos, that's for sure.
And your research points out that when tariffs make imported goods more expensive, businesses tend to become more reliant on domestic suppliers.
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of forced to.
Which, I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a good thing, right? Supporting local businesses, all that.
Right. Sounds patriotic.
Yeah, but you're saying it actually creates this vulnerability.
It does.
Ugh.
Because if something happens to disrupt domestic production,
Like what? Give me an example.
well, it could be anything, really. A natural disaster, a labor shortage, even just a sudden surge in demand that domestic suppliers can't keep up with.
So those companies that have limited themselves to just domestic suppliers, they have less flexibility to adapt, right?
Exactly. It's like putting all your eggs in one basket.
And you give this really clear example in the document about lumber.
Oh, right. The lumber tariff.
Yeah. Walk me through that again.
Okay, so let's say the U.S. slaps a tariff on imported lumber, right?
Okay.
At first, that seems like a win for domestic lumber mills, right?
More business for them.
Exactly, less competition. But then, let's say a massive wildfire rips through a major timber-producing region in the U.S.
Okay, so now domestic lumber production is down.
Way down, there's a shortage.
And because we haven't been importing as much lumber because of the tariff?
We're in trouble. Construction projects get delayed, prices skyrocket, and the whole economy takes a hit.
Wow, I never thought about it like that.
It's a ripple effect.
So tariffs can actually end up making us more vulnerable to these kinds of shocks.
Exactly. When you limit your options, you make yourself more susceptible to disruptions.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the impact of tariffs on costs? For businesses, for consumers, and ultimately for inflation.
Yeah, that's another big one.
Because that's what people really feel, right? Like their wallets are hurting.
That's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Exactly.
And what happens is when tariffs make those imported materials more expensive, those higher costs get passed down the line.
So first to businesses.
Right, their
Yep.
costs go up.
And then to us.
Exactly. Higher prices for consumers. And we're all feeling that right now, right?
Yeah.
Groceries, gas, electronics, everything's more expensive.
It's crazy.
It's inflation.
And you argue that this can actually create this vicious cycle.
It can.
How so?
Well, when prices go up,
People buy less stuff.
right, demand goes down, and that slows down the whole economy.
Hmm.
Businesses might start cutting back, laying off workers, and that just makes things worse for everyone.
So even though tariffs are supposed to protect domestic industries, they can actually end up hurting the economy in the long run.
Exactly. It's like a Band-Aid solution that creates a bigger problem down the line.
Okay, so we've got supply chain issues, we've got inflation. What else?
Well, there's also the risk of retaliation.
Oh, right, the whole trade war thing.
Exactly. One country puts up tariffs, another country retaliates with tariffs on something else, and pretty soon everyone's trying to protect their own industries, and global trade just grinds to a halt.
Like a bunch of kids fighting over toys.
Kinda, yeah. And it ends up hurting everyone because it limits access to goods and services, disrupts those supply chains even more, and it can even lead to, political tensions between countries.
It's like shooting ourselves in the foot again, only this time everyone's doing it.
Yeah, it's a race to the bottom.
And you argue that this kind of protectionist approach, it's especially bad in today's world, right?
Oh, yeah. We're so interconnected now, globalization and all that.
Mm.
Cooperation is key, not isolation.
Right, we need each other.
Exactly. And tariffs just create barriers. They get in the way of that cooperation and that free flow of goods and ideas.
So tariffs are bad for supply chains, they fuel inflation, they can spark trade wars. Anything else?
Well, there's one more point you raised that I thought was really interesting.
Okay, what's that?
The idea that tariffs can actually stifle competitiveness and innovation.
I hadn't thought about that.
It's counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, explain that one to me.
Well, think about it. In a free market, companies are constantly competing with each other.
Right, they have to innovate to stay ahead.
Exactly. They're always trying to come up with the best products, the lowest prices, just to stay in the game.
But if tariffs shield domestic industries from all that foreign competition,
They get lazy. They don't have to try as hard because they're protected.
so they have less incentive to innovate, to improve efficiency, to invest in research and development.
Exactly. And that can lead to stagnation. Consumers end up with fewer choices, higher prices, and domestic industries fall behind.
They become dinosaurs.
Pretty much.
Oh,
And it hurts the economy in the long run.
that's a really good point.
So yeah, I think your document makes a really compelling case for why tariffs might seem appealing on the surface.
They often have these unintended consequences that can really backfire.
Exactly. It's like, be careful what you wish for.
Okay, so we've talked about all the downsides of tariffs. Now let's get to the exciting part.
The solutions.
Yeah, because your document isn't just a critique, right? It's like this blueprint for a better economic future.
A roadmap.
Yeah, exactly. So let's dive into those alternative strategies that you propose.
All right, let's get into it.
You start by advocating for big investments in innovation and productivity.
Right.
And this is where things get really interesting, right? Because it's not just about protecting those old industries.
Right. It's about looking ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Fostering growth and competitiveness in those new emerging sectors.
It's about playing offense, not defense.
I like that. So instead of propping up those outdated industries with tariffs, you're saying we should be pouring resources into research and development,
Exactly.
especially in areas like, automation, renewable energy, sustainable agriculture.
Those are some of the big ones, yeah.
And you're not just talking about government funding here, right?
No, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach.
Okay, so what else are you thinking?
Well, we need to create an environment where businesses can thrive, Like streamline those regulations that are strangling entrepreneurship.
Oh, yeah, the red tape.
Exactly. And maybe offer some tax incentives for companies that are investing in R&D, really pushing the envelope.
So it's about rewarding innovation.
Exactly. Create a culture where businesses are constantly striving to be better, faster, cheaper, and that ultimately benefits everyone because it leads to lower prices for consumers.
So it's a win-win.
Exactly. It's not a zero-sum game.
Okay, I like that. And you get really specific in the document about how innovation can actually lower costs.
Yeah. Got to get into the nitty-gritty.
You talk about automation, for example.
Automation's huge.
How it can revolutionize manufacturing, make it more efficient, which could mean lower prices on everything.
Everything. Cars, clothes, you name it.
It's mind-blowing. And then there's renewable energy.
Oh, yeah. That's a game changer.
Less reliance on fossil fuels, which means
Lower energy costs for everyone.
businesses, individuals, everyone wins.
Exactly. It's a win-win-win.
And then there's, precision agriculture.
Yeah, precision agriculture, vertical farming, all these new techniques that are allowing us to grow more food with less water, less land, fewer pesticides.
So food becomes more affordable and accessible to everyone.
That's the goal, right?
It's amazing. The possibilities are just endless.
Mm,
But you don't just focus on technology, right? You also emphasize the importance of investing in education and workforce development.
right. You can't have a thriving economy without a skilled workforce.
You got to have the people to make it all happen.
Exactly. We need to make sure people have the knowledge and skills they need to succeed in this rapidly changing world.
And you're talking about more than just like traditional four-year college degrees, right?
Right. It's got to be broader than that. Vocational training, apprenticeships, online learning platforms, all that stuff.
So like meeting people where they're at and helping them develop those specific skills that are in high demand.
Exactly. And it's not just about initial training either. It's about lifelong learning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people need to be able to adapt and acquire new skills throughout their careers.
The world's changing so fast.
It is. And we need to keep up.
And you even suggest creating a system of like skills vouchers.
Oh, yeah, that's a cool idea.
Right, where individuals could use these vouchers to pay for training programs that align with their career goals.
Empowering people to take control of their own education.
Yeah, and making it easier for them to get those skills that employers are actually looking for.
It's about investing in human capital.
And creating a more equitable economy where everyone has the opportunity to succeed.
Exactly. It's not just about the bottom line. It's about creating a better society.
Okay, so we've got innovation, education, what else?
Well, you also tackle the issue of affordable housing.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
A huge one. Housing costs are through the roof, and it's putting a massive strain on families.
So what's the solution there?
Well, you propose this multi-pronged approach, like increasing the supply of affordable housing units.
Okay, so building more affordable housing.
Exactly. And providing rental assistance to low-income families, maybe exploring some of those innovative housing models like co-housing communities or micro-apartments.
To make better use of space, especially in those crowded urban areas.
Right, get creative. And then finally, you talk about fostering a more stable and predictable economic environment.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, it's about implementing those fiscal policies that promote sustainable growth, responsible government spending, tax reforms that simplify the tax code, and provide relief to those middle and lower income families who are really struggling.
So it's about creating a system that's fair, that's efficient, and that supports long-term economic growth.
Exactly. And it's about maintaining a stable monetary policy, keeping inflation under control without stifling economic growth,
So finding that sweet spot.
right? That delicate balance. And you even suggest exploring some of those, more unconventional monetary policy tools like negative interest rates or a universal basic income.
To address those future economic challenges.
Exactly. Thinking outside the box.
It's really impressive, the breadth and depth of your research.
Well, thanks.
It's not just a critique of tariff, it's like this comprehensive roadmap for building a better future.
That was the goal.
Well, you definitely achieved it. It's a testament to the power of, thoughtful research, creative problem solving, and just like a genuine desire to make the world a better place.
Well, I appreciate that. It's been a pleasure discussing this with you.
The pleasure was all mine, seriously. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. A huge thank you to you for sharing your research with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this exploration of tariffs and the search for a more resilient and affordable future. We hope this deep dive has given you some new perspectives on these complex issues and maybe even inspired you to think about, what kind of future you want to create.
Because we all have a role to play in shaping that future.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for today. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.